The theme today is why are we here? And I would like to put a slight twist on it to say, why don't we look at where we were and how we got here and see how it weaves together just about every talk we had here today, because it goes to the fundamental aspect of actually why we're all here is because we're social mammals and we have to be here. If we don't come together like this, we start to die. Now, how did that all happen? I'm going to ask you to, once again, if you could picture zombies, let's put on that same imaginative brain and travel back into the Ice Age and think about what our ancestors looked at every day. This is what they looked at. Quiet mind, no language, supervisual creatures that they were. They looked out on this moving, massive landscape where they were smaller, slower, weaker, and wildly outnumbered. We hung in the margins over here as prey animals, not the top predator we would become. So right away you got to get that Ice Age ego and knock it down that many pegs and start thinking of us as prey animals looking out on this. These are the social carnivores that ruled the Ice Age, and they also got the best food, and it was our urge to eat that kind of meal that inspired us to study them for dear life and figure out what their strengths were and their weaknesses were and how we might be able to mimic them and survive the gauntlet of them. We stared at these animals for dear life, and what we didn't know at the time was that there's no such thing as just watching. When you direct super quality of attention to anything, you start to trigger a brain system that makes you feel an attachment towards that thing. It's called the mere exposure effect, actually. And this is how we know it happened, because the minute we could express ourselves, this is what we did. We painted those animals that we stared at that closely. And if you look closely at this painting, you'll see whisker dots. And this is, a 30,000-year-old cave painting. Those whisker dots on each one of those lions are what wildlife biologists measure and map from a distance with telephoto lenses and binoculars so that they can tell the individual members of each pride. Our ancestors had A, vision that good, B, an incredible memory, visual memory, because then they went into caves and they painted these, from memory. And obviously, they got close enough to those animals that they could see them in that detail. These were drawn with the naked eye, which means that these animals were not horribly afraid of our ancestors, nor were our ancestors scared to death of them. This is indication that there was a level of détente that we had achieved with wild animals by 30,000 years ago. Our ancestors were animal experts in their behavior in a way that we never will be again. So they mapped the behavior and the anatomy perfectly. This is what they did as soon as they could. For 20,000 years, we painted millions of images of animals on every surface we could find. And these are the dreams of our ancestors. When you think that the Ice Age artists, these were the first people who would tell animals where they would go and what they would do. It was an incredible power that they had, and it must have been a huge boost to the Ice Age ego and the dawning imagination and consciousness of the early human mind. And this is how important animals were to our dawning consciousness. We burned them into our retinas so that we could reproduce them like this, and in doing that, we burned them into our consciousness and our DNA. This is how we painted people when we bothered doing it. The human image is incredibly rare in any of these Ice Age paintings. And we certainly didn't waste a lot of charcoal on it, which is another indication that the Ice Age ego was not what it is today. This is the Ice Age ego. We had the urge to merge. This is just as old as those paintings. It's a carving that was found in a cave nearby in Germany, actually. And this is evidence that we had this urge to merge. And look who we gave top billing, the creature that we considered superior to us. And why wouldn't we consider them superior? They own the joint. This is evidence that something else was going on in the Ice Age that was sculpting a hybrid as well. This is the Goya Proto dog skull, 31,700 years old. It's shorter, it's wider than a wolf skull. It's the beginning of dog. And it was happening in the same caves that those people lived in. And this is the creature. This is the creature who, the social carnivore of the Ice Age, that would have the neural brain stuff to merge with us. They shared our dream of interspecies glory. This is the wolf skull compared to the dog skull. And the dog skull is slighter and smaller up there in A1. And you see A1 and A2 is the wolf skull, and then on the B side you have the proto dog coming into play. This is the skull that barked. Wolves don't bark. As puppies they do, but they don't any longer. And the bark cannot be underestimated for its importance in how we ended up with dogs in our home today, and in fact, how we ended up, and not Neanderthals perhaps, as being the ancestors of us. Could that possibly be a right sentence? Anyway, what we know is that these skulls were found just when the Neanderthals were disappearing, and archaeologists are now hypothesizing that it was the modern humans' ability to merge with dogs, to create the human-animal bond with these proto-dogs that gave them the competitive edge over the Neanderthals and made us the great social carnivores, took us out of the prey category and moved us into the top predator category that we once only dreamed of. And there it is. They made us stronger. They made us faster. They took us places we could never go on our own. And this is the man who gave us the best inkling into just how fast that could have happened. His name is Dmitry Belyaev. He started to study Siberian wolves in a fox fur industry up in Siberia. He was actually sort of isolated up there, as they said in Stalin days. And he chose just the tamest of these animals. And these animals are not tame. That's what they do. They're very hyper, super fight-flight chemistry. And he would pick just the ones that would not attack him, and he started breeding them. And in 6 generations, he had this, which is what he called his domesticated elite. And they were shorter skulls and wider, and they were like, I call them fogs, because they wag their tails and they want to be in your lap, and they're dogs basically, and they bark. So he showed that by just selecting for tameness, you could get tamer animals. He stumbled on the same secret our Ice Age ancestors came up with, which was nicer dogs can have nicer puppies. And what the amazing thing is to learn that when you have this physiological change, because see the coat color and the eye color and the ears, well, they're standing up now, but they'll flop over later, which is not fox-like, that it betrays a brain chemistry going on beneath that changes the behavior as well. So all these things are bundled together genetically, and who knew? Well, our ancestors found out by accident, and this guy sort of did too. These are the little animals that gave us a look inside those skulls as they were changing and told us what was going on. These are prairie voles, and they're hypersocial like us. And this is what their brains look like. And you'll see that they have cousins. On the right-hand side, it's the montane voles, which none of us would probably be able to tell them apart looking at them. But you see the dark parts. On the top, you're going to see the word oxytocin, and then below that is vasopressin. Oxytocin is the star of this story, basically. Vasopressin comes in as a close second. Depending on how many oxytocin receptors your brain makes and how much oxytocin you make in your bodies and brains decides how social you are, how tame you are. Because what it does is, and this is how it's released in humans, by the way, this is the maternal bond. It runs the maternal bond. It runs all social bonding. So a mother is looking at that baby, the eye contact is releasing oxytocin, the baby suckling is releasing oxytocin in the baby and in the mother, the warmth of her breast, the touch. all wonderful things release oxytocin and make us nicer. What it does is it shuts off the amygdala. So here's pictures when they gave people oxytocin inhalants. On the bottom you see the little red dots, that's the amygdala. And then they showed them scary faces, zombies maybe. And there's almost no reaction over here. When they gave them a placebo and they showed them scary faces, you have the natural, this is the alarm button in the brain, it's the fear center, and when it goes off, it makes this thing happen, which is the HPA stress axis. It's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal stress axis, and it starts at the top, and it's this Rube Goldberg effect, and by the end you have adrenal cortex is releasing adrenaline and cortisol and all these stress hormones, and it runs the fight-flight system. The fight-flight system is wildness. It is what makes animals and humans wild. You cannot run a hyper-social society like ours if you live in the fight-flight state. And what they found out was, when you shut this off, it's not just shut off, that there's an even more powerful response that we all better live in as social mammals, 99% of the time, called calm connect. And that is modulated and organized by oxytocin, which is released when we smile at one another, when we walk up and shake hands and hug, when we have sex, all of those wonderful things, when we eat a good meal, when we drink a glass of wine, when we share a good meal. It's socially released, and it runs and supports cooperation and trust and all critical social things that allow us to perform as we do today. These little guys, these little wolf pups, when we brought them into our caves and they started crying because they missed their mothers or they were hungry, well, there was no 7-Eleven and there was no PetSmart. This is what happened. Sorry about the slide, but you just can't get a lot of good slides on this stuff too often. Anyway, all primitive women suckle baby animals. It's what you did to keep them alive. In an Ice Age cave, when this happened, by accident, they triggered this amazing neurochemical cascade between the wolves and the humans, and started the creation of the dog. Puts women at the square center of all domestication. And you see, this is a classic triad where mother and father looking at baby, oxytocin's being released. This is exactly what's going on here because this is a mammalian hormone. And we now know that these two people are getting just as much oxytocin kissing that dog as those people are with their baby. And one of the great things that oxytocin does, when you have a baby, it may not look like you. It's kind of like immediately it probably looks like nobody might want to claim it. A mother must, because she has this flush of oxytocin, which is released during the birth process, sees that baby and claims it as hers. And that is because oxytocin creates a cognitive effect called social recognition, and you see other as kin. Otherwise, you never would. I would meet you, I'd walk up to you, I'd say, hi. If you gave me a pill that knocked out my oxytocin, and they do this in labs, not with humans, of course, but they do this in labs, I wouldn't remember meeting you 2 minutes, I come, hi. I just keep doing it. We could never establish a friendship. Here's a classic case of how it goes through the species barrier. This is Romulus and Remus. This she-wolf was the stepmother of Roman civilization. That's how the Romans saw the birth of their civilization. This is an incredible oxytocin illustration. And then when we created dogs, and the Romans said, okay, now you've helped create our empire, protect the booty that we got from it. All of domestication, you could say, is a case of mistaken identity. And here's a classic case. So here's a Great Pyrenees. This little puppy is raised with lambs or sheep, and it thinks it's one of them. And the oxytocin that is released during this incredibly important window of early baby stage, in this puppy's mind, and in this guy's brain too, they think that they are one and the same. It's social recognition. And it inhibits this animal's urge to rip the lungs out of this other one, which it normally would do. And in fact, it turns the whole thing into the wolf that lays down with the sheep. So all of the predatory instinct, all of the territoriality gets subverted into this new task of taking care of this flock instead of stalking it. And this is how whole human civilizations were fed and built. And of course, you have this animal, which was the auroch, which the Roman legions ran from screaming until it was domesticated. And this is another classic oxytocin slide, which is a 5,000-year-old tomb carving from Egypt. The mother is sniffing her baby and seeing it, which is causing the oxytocin to release breast milk, and this person is, collecting it, and the tactile stimulation is causing more oxytocin feedback. And the tear, in fact, is more indication that oxytocin is being released, because oxytocin is also involved in tear release. So, okay, you have an oxytocin illustration done by the Egyptians. Here's the other thing about the Egyptians. They were the animal behaviorists par excellence. They were, back in the day, they were the Bill Gates and the Steve Jobs of their time, because animal intelligence was as important to survival and the great technology future we just saw as artificial intelligence is today. So that was the dude right there. And when people say, oh my God, now, I saw somebody with their dog and it was dressed up like a little sailor and it was in their purse, and can you believe it? Oh my God, we are just so out of control. I would just point back that it's been done before. The Egyptians loved animals. They deified them. They didn't just put them in their purse, they mummified them and put them in sarcophagus. If your cat died and you were an Egyptian, you would shave your eyebrows off, and the whole family would go into mourning for a year. So we're not off the charts yet. Other great animal behaviorists, people who had a way with animals, again, the Steve Jobs, the MIT people of their day, domesticated the horse. We had looked at this animal as dinner for millennia, and then somebody said, what if we rode it? Good idea. Again, this dream, this ancestral dream of merging with animals to become stronger and faster, and I am out of time. Whoops, this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. That's Harry Truman. We're never going back to the farm. That's the farm. This is our new landscape, surrounded by millions, touched by none. If we had a physiology that evolved because we touched and cared for animals 24/7 for 12,000 years, can we get it done virtually? I don't think so. Anyway, we got rid of the sheep and we kept the shepherd, and thank goodness we did that. And this is the future of the human-animal bond. And we're facing, through oxytocin deprivation, a mental national health crisis now of depression and suicide and cardiac arrest, because we've lost the cardiovascular and the mental protection of oxytocin. And we have all these soldiers coming home. And we have hundreds of thousands of people that I am working with now with PTSD. And oxytocin, through this dog program that we have, is maybe their best bet at finding the peace in their hearts and minds again now. And for all of us too. So I would say for the technologists in the group, terrific. It might happen, but we have a physiology that's far more ancient, and I think we better hold our dogs as close as we can. Thank you very much.